Lipids. It includes chapter 21. In the same way that we have talked about carbohydrates, we are going to talk about lipids, the metabolism of lipids, either anabolism or catabolism. The idea here is how to convert the catabolism is how to convert fatty acids into acetyl-CoA. What is the acetyl-CoA acid? It's a CH3CO, okay, or COCH3. It's a functional group. This is the acetyl-CoA. Now, this is the catabolism, how to change the acetyl-CoA from fatty acids. Now, the anabolism, how to build fatty acids like palmitate or cholesterol from the acetyl-CoA. We have two pathways, the beta oxidation and the ketone bodies. Let's begin by the beta oxidation. The idea of the beta oxidation is to cut 2 carbon atoms from the fatty acid in each cycle. So the beta oxidation pathway is a cycle that will take a fatty acid. In each cycle you will cut 2 carbon atoms. Those 2 carbon atoms are the acetyl-CoA. Before entering the beta oxidation cycle, we need to know a few details. The release of fatty acid is done by 2 enzymes. The first enzyme is called lipase. It releases the fatty acids from triglyceride. The second enzyme is called phospholipase. It releases the fatty acid from phospholipid. What I'm talking about, let's see it in this figure. Here we have a triglyceride. Okay, this is all a triglyceride. Here we have a fatty acid. This one is a fatty acid. This is a fatty acid. This is a fatty acid. Now, before entering the beta oxidation, this triglyceride can't enter the beta oxidation, but the fatty acid can enter the beta oxidation. So, the first step for the beta oxidation or before the beta oxidation is to change the fatty acid. From where to change the fatty acid? Either from triglyceride or from phospholipid. The enzyme that will release the fatty acid from the triglyceride, we call it lipase. The enzyme that will release the fatty acid from phospholipid, we call it phospholipase. This is the first point. The second point that will happen before entering the beta oxidation, we call it activation step. The activation step is to form a thioester bond between the fatty acid and a coenzyme A. Why? I will say why in the next figure. This step happens in the cytosol. Okay, now let's see this figure. Here we have the cytosol, okay, and here we have the mitochondria, the outer membrane of the mitochondria and the inner membrane of the mitochondria. The beta oxidation happens in the matrix. Now the fatty acid is in the cytosol. It can't enter the mitochondria by itself. So the first thing for the fatty acid to be able to enter the mitochondria is to be activated. What we mean by the activation of fatty acid, it means that to make a bond between the fatty acid and the coenzyme A. So here we have the fatty acid, okay, here binded with the coenzyme A. This is an activated fatty acid. This activated fatty acid can cross the outer membrane, but the fatty acid alone without a coenzyme A can't cross the outer membrane. So here the fatty acid will cross the outer membrane. Inside the intermembrane space, the fatty acid, the activated fatty acid, can't cross the inner membrane space. It must go through a special reaction. This reaction contains an enzyme called carnitine acetyltransferase. Okay, this carnitine acetyltransferase will do 2 things. The first thing, it will release the coenzyme A from the activated fatty acid. The second thing, it will bind the fatty acid with a carnitine molecule. Now we will have a compound called acyl-carnitine. The acyl-carnitine compound will cross the inner membrane of the mitochondria. In the matrix, the acyl-carnitine is not useful. So we need to go back to the activated fatty acid. To go back to the activated fatty acid, we also use a carnitine acetyltransferase, but it's another enzyme. They call it carnitine acetyltransferase 2. Okay, now this enzyme will do the reverse from the first one, the opposite. It will release the carnitine, okay, and it will bind the fatty acid with a coenzyme A. This fatty acid can go to the beta oxidation. So what happened before the beta oxidation? First thing, we activated the fatty acid. This activated fatty acid can cross the outer membrane. but it can't cross the inner membrane. To cross the inner membrane, we bind it with carnitine. We use carnitine acetyltransferase. Okay, the name of the enzyme is very simple. Carnitine, this is carnitine acetyltransferase, because we move the acyl group. The acyl group, this is the acyl group, we move it from the coenzyme A to the carnitine. Now the acyl carnitine can cross the inner membrane. Okay, now we will go to the beta oxidation. The beta oxidation pathway. This pathway is very simple. We have only 4 reactions. 2 of those reactions are oxidation reactions. Okay, remember, in catabolism, we always, in general, okay, in the catabolism reactions, we will see an oxidation reactions. We will see a dehydrogenase enzymes. Why? Because we need to take some compounds or some atoms from the compounds to give them to another transporters. So here we have 4 reactions. 2 of them oxidation, 1 is hydration, and 1 is cleavage. To begin with this pathway, we have the fatty acyl binded to the coenzyme A. We see it in the previous that the fatty acid, the activated fatty acid cross. Okay, we saw how it can cross the outer, how it can cross the inner, and in the matrix we have the fatty acyl coenzyme A. This compound will react with the acyl coenzyme A dehydrogenase, and we said that dehydrogenase is a type of enzyme that will take a hydrogen from the compound and it will give it to another transporter. Okay, so here we will have a fat H2. This is the first oxidation. The compound that will be produced, we will add a water to it. It will react with enol-CoA hydratase. Okay, this enzyme name is took from the compound name here. It's enol coenzyme A. So here we have enol coenzyme A hydratase. And remember, hydratase is a type of enzyme that can add water to the molecule. By adding water to this molecule, we will have a compound called hydroxyacyl-CoA. Hydroxy came from this OH. Okay, so I'm trying my best to relate the name of the compound, the name of the enzyme with the reactions. Now this compound will be oxidized. Okay, we will take an H atom from it and we will give it to the NAD+. So the enzyme name must contain a dehydrogenase, and see this enzyme name, it's hydroxyacyl coenzyme A dehydrogenase. So we will have a ketoacyl-CoA. This ketoacyl-CoA will be cleaved by thiolase. Now this cleavage will release an acetyl-CoA. The remaining of the fatty acid will continue in the cycle, and in each turn in this cycle, this is very important, in each turn in this cycle we will have 1 acetyl-CoA, we will have 1 fat H2, we will have 1 NADH. This is very important in the calculations that I will talk about it in the end of this video. The idea of the ketone bodies is as follows. They are produced when there is an excess of acetyl-CoA from the beta oxidation. Okay, remember, the idea of the beta oxidation is to produce as much as we can from the acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA will go to the citric acid cycle. In the citric acid cycle, each 1 acetyl-CoA will produce a total of 10 ATP by forming the transporters, the 3 NADH and the 1 FADH, okay, and the 1 GTP. Now, if there is no oxaloacetate, the citric acid cycle will not be produced. Okay, so there will be no citric acid cycle. The acetyl-CoA will be increased. If the acetyl-CoA increase, this is not a normal condition in our body. So our body will remove the acetyl-CoA to another pathway that don't need an oxaloacetate. Why? Because I don't have oxaloacetate. So when I have an excess of acetyl-CoA, I will go to the ketone bodies pathway. The idea of the ketone bodies pathway is to use the excess of the acetyl-CoA. It's another pathway that we can use the acetyl-CoA to produce some energy. Okay. Now, when we will have a not enough oxaloacetate in the following conditions: when there is a high intake of lipids and a low intake of carbohydrates and starvation and diabetes. Okay, so those conditions, If one of them happen, we will not have an oxaloacetate. If there is no oxaloacetate, there will be an excess of acetyl-CoA. If there is an excess of acetyl-CoA, there will be no citric acid cycle. The acetyl-CoA will go to the ketone body cycle. So let's begin by the ketone body cycle. It's very simple. In the beginning, we will have a 2-acetyl-CoA. Those 2-acetyl-CoA will combine with each other. The thiolase enzyme will cut one of the coenzyme A in one of them, and the rest of the two compounds will bind with each other. So we will have an acetoacyl-CoA. What is the acetoacyl-CoA? In very simple words, it's the combination of 2-acetyl-CoA. Okay? Now the acetyl-CoA, we will add an acetyl-CoA to it. Okay, so in the first, I combined a 2-acetyl. In the second step, I added another acetyl to those 2-acetyl. So here I have a compound that contains 3-acetoacyl. Okay, I think it's very simple. In the beginning, we combined 2-acetyl. After that, we added 1-acetyl to the acetoacetyl. Okay, so we have this compound. It's called hydroxymethylglycerol-CoA. Now, the enzyme that have done this reaction, we called it hydroxymethylglycerol-CoA. It's a very long name. Just remember, it's HMG. Okay, in the exam they ask you like HMG. Okay, HMG-CoA synthase. This enzyme, we have 4 types of it: an HMG synthase, an HMG lyase, and in the cholesterol we will see another 2 types of this enzyme: an HMG synthetase and an HMG reductase. Why I'm saying this now? Because if you know this, it will be very easy to you, because they love to ask about this. Where is the HMG synthase? It's in the ketone body, but the synthetase, it's in the cholesterol. Okay, so differentiate between them. Now we have our compound that it's called hydroxymethylglycerol. This compound will react with an enzyme called HMG. But let's back to this step. Okay, I want to give you a hint for the synthase. In the rules, I said that synthase is a type of enzyme that can make a new bond between 2 molecules without the need of energy. So here we have the acetoacyl molecule. We will make a new bond between the acetoacyl molecule and the acetyl molecule. Okay, by using the synthase enzyme. So what is the function of synthase family enzymes? It will make a new bond between 2 compounds without the need of energy, and we can see this here. Okay, now this compound, the hydroxymethylglycerol, it will go and react with a compound called HMG coenzyme A lyase. Lyase means to cut or to lose. So this compound will lose an acetyl coenzyme A. Now I will make a very fast review for what I have been saying. In the beginning of the ketone body cycle, we will combine a 2-acetyl. We will form acetoacyl. The acetoacyl, we will add a 1-acetyl to it. We will form the hydroxymethylglycerol. Now we will remove a 1-acetyl from the hydroxymethyl to form the acetoacetate. The acetoacetate is the first ketone body. So this is the first ketone body. The acetoacetate can have 3 fates. Either it can form energy. This energy is equal to 20 ATP. Okay, so remember, if you ask you what is the energy that can be formed from the acetoacetate, it's equal to 20 ATP. Why? Because it contains 2-acetyl-CoA. So here we have 3. Remember that the lyase remove 1, and here remain 2-acetyl-CoA. Those 2-acetyl-CoA, they are equal to 20 ATP. And remember always, each acetyl-CoA, when it goes to the citric acid cycle, it will give me 10 ATP. Okay, this is the total from the transporters and the GTP. Now the acetoacetate have another 2 pathways. Either it can go to form the acetone if it reacts in the decarboxylation. Decarboxylation means to lose a CO2. So if it loses a CO2, it will be an acetone. Or to form the hydroxybutyrate. The hydroxybutyrate, if it reduce means to add hydrogen atoms to this compound. If we add hydrogen atoms to this compound, it will be reduced and it will form the hydroxybutyrate. The idea of acetone and hydroxybutyrate is to control the pH. So the ketone bodies pathway, in total of it, it's a pathway that can take the excess of the acetyl-CoA to form energy in the case of acetoacetate, or to control the pH in the case of acetone and the beta-hydroxybutyrate. The anabolism of lipids. The idea here is to see how we can build a huge lipid molecule starting from the acyl molecule. Remember that acyl is COCH3. Here it is, COCH3. Now this is the pathway that we are going to study to see how we can build lipid molecules. We will divide this pathway into two parts. This is the first part and this is the second part. In the first part we are going to see how we can make something called a primer. In the second part we are going to see how to add carbon atoms to this primer. So the idea of making lipids, first thing we need to make a primer. Second thing, you need to add carbon atoms to this primer. So let's begin by the first half of this pathway and to see how we can make the primer. Before going into the making of the primer, I need to mention a little comparison or a small comparison between the anabolism and the catabolism. In the catabolism, we said that we have beta oxidation cycle. In the beta oxidation cycle, we had two oxidation reaction, one cleavage reaction and one hydration reaction. Here in the anabolism we have the opposite reaction but with different enzymes. We have a condensation reaction and we have a 2-reduction reaction and we have a dehydration reaction. Okay, so now we are going to see how we can build the primer. First of all, we will see something called the acyl and something called malonyl. Okay, those acyl and those malonyl, we are going to combine them with each other to form the first molecule in this pathway to make the primer. Okay, so first of all we will start by the acyl. We said that the acyl is a COCH3. Okay, it will react with an enzyme called acetyltransferase. From its name, acetyltransferase, it will transfer the acetyl group here from the coenzyme A and it will bind it with something called ACB, acyl carrier protein. Okay, after that the ACB will be replaced with something called HS or ketoacyl. So in the end we will have acetyl, the coenzyme A will be replaced by this ketoacyl. Okay, and we have another thing called malonyl. This malonyl is formed from the acyl-CoA. If acyl-CoA reacted with an enzyme called acyl-CoA carboxylase complex, we said that in the rules that carboxylase is a type of enzyme that can add a carbon atom. So here we have the CO2. Carboxylase, sorry, can add a CO2 molecule. So here we have the CO2 molecule we have added to the acyl-CoA. In this case we will have a compound called malonyl. So what is malonyl? It's acyl-CoA. We have added a CO2 molecule to it. Now the malonyl, we will replace the coenzyme A with an ACB carrier. So now we have prepared the two basic molecules to combine them to make the primer. Okay, so here we have the two basic molecules, the acyl-CoA combined with the ketoacyl and the malonyl Ka combined with ACB. Always remember that the acyl will combine with ketoacyl and the malonyl will combine with ACB molecule. Now we are going to see four reactions. Okay, the first reaction is a condensation reaction. We will combine those two molecules to form the acetoacyl. Okay, here the malonyl will lose the CO2 and the acyl will lose the ketoacyl. So we will have something called acetoacyl ACB. Now the acetoacyl ACB will react with a compound called beta ketoacyl ACB reductase. Reductase means that we are going to add H+. Okay, by adding H+, we are going to remove those double bonds. Okay, here we have removed the double bond. Okay, because we want to make a basic structure to build the fatty acid. Okay, so those reactions are just to remove the double bonds. Okay, here is the first double bond have been removed. Now we will see the second double bond, how we can remove it. Okay, after this reaction, the compound, the beta hydroxybutyryl, why we call it beta hydroxy? Because we have form an OH group, a hydroxyl group. This compound will react with beta hydroxyacyl ACB dehydrase. Dehydrase means that this enzyme can take a water molecule from this compound. So we will remove a water molecule from this compound to form a compound called crotonel. Crotonel will react with an enzyme called transacyl ACD reductase. Reductase means that H plus will be added to this compound. Adding H plus to this compound will remove the double bonds. And here we have made the primer, the butyryl ACB. Okay, this primer, we are going to add carbon atoms to it, the malonyl carbon atoms. In each step, we will add 2 malonyl carbon atoms to this primer. Okay, till reaching the final fatty acid, we call it palmitate. Okay, in animals, the hugest fatty acid that we can make is palmitate. In the end, an enzyme called palmityl thioesterase will remove the ACB. So the idea of making lipid, first thing you need to make the primer, second thing you need to add carbon atoms to this primer. Now we will talk about the anabolism of cholesterol. It's a huge pathway, so I divide it into 3 pictures. So let's begin by the first one. The beginning of the anabolism of cholesterol is same as the catabolism of ketone, but the first step here is to take 2-acetyl-CoA, and those 2-acetyl-CoA are going to be combined with each other, okay, to form the acetyl-acetyl-CoA through the enzyme thiolase. The thiolase will remove a 1 coenzyme A from one of the 2-acetyl, and the remaining 2-acetyl will combine with each other to form the acetyl-acetyl-CoA. Now the aceto-acetyl-CoA will react with an enzyme called hydroxymethylgluteryl-CoA synthetase. We have seen a brother for this enzyme before. It was called HMG-CoA synthetase, but here we have synthetase. Okay, and we said that synthetase is a type of enzyme that can make a new bond, but it needs energy. The energy for this enzyme will come from the coenzyme A. Okay, and after reacting with this enzyme, we will have a compound called hydroxymethylgluteryl-CoA. This compound will react with an enzyme called hydroxymethylgluteryl-CoA reductase. Okay, so now you need to know that we have an HMG synthase and an HMG lyase. Those are found in the ketone bodies. Here we have the HMG reductase and the HMG synthetase. Okay, and the HMG reductase in this pathway in the cholesterol anabolism, it's the regulatory enzyme. Okay, what we mean by a regulatory enzyme? This enzyme is responsible for the whole, or it's the major enzyme in this pathway. If we can control this enzyme, we can control the anabolism of cholesterol. And the scientists found that there is some type of drugs that can inhibit this enzyme. They called this family of drugs that can inhibit the HMG-CoA reductase statin. So like a drug called atorvastatin. Okay, whatever the name of the drug, if you find this part in the name statin, you can know that this type of drug will work in the HMG-CoA reductase. Okay, after that we will have a molecule called mevalonate. Now you will see a lot of names for a lot of compounds. What you care about, the most important, is the number of carbon atoms. Here we have 6 carbon atoms in the mevalonate. So to summarize what we have said in the first part in this picture, we will begin by 2-acetyl-CoA. The first step is similar as ketone bodies. We will form the aceto-acyl-CoA. After that we will the HMG synthetase, and after it the HMG reductase. We will reach mevalonate. Now after mevalonate, the mevalonate will go through 3 reactions. The first 2 reactions will add phosphate group to the mevalonate. The last one will remove a CO2 molecule. So the first enzyme is called mevalonate kinase. What we mean by mevalonate kinase? Kinase is a type of enzyme that can take a phosphate group from ATP or another molecule and add it to another molecule. So the mevalonate kinase will take the phosphate group from ATP and it will add it to mevalonate. After that, we will have a molecule called phosphomevalonate kinase. Phosphomevalonate. And the phosphomevalonate molecule will react with phosphomevalonate kinase. It will take the phosphate group from ATP and it will add it to the phosphomevalonate. So we will have 5-pyrophosphomevalonate. Okay. Now this molecule will react with pyrophosphomevalonate decarboxylase. Remember that decarboxylase is a type of enzyme that can remove the CO2. Okay. After that, we will have something called isopentyl pyrophosphate. The isopentyl pyrophosphate, I said that we will have a lot of compounds and a lot of names. What we care about, the most important, is the number of carbons. The mevalonate was 6 carbon atoms. Now we will have a compound called isopentyl, is 5 carbon atoms. The isopentyl will react with an enzyme called isopentyl pyrophosphate isomerase. Okay. The isomerase is a type of enzyme that can make an isomerization. Okay, isomerization to change the shape, the structure of the, to change the shape of the compound. That's it. So the isopentyl will be dimethylallyle. What I'm trying to make here is to make you, just by hearing the enzyme name, to know what is the function, to know what is the enzyme, what is the compound that this enzyme work on. Okay, so just look at the enzyme name, isopentyl. Here is the isopentyl isomerase. It just change the shape of the compound. Now the dimethylallyle pyrophosphate will react with another 2 isopentyl molecule. So here we have a condensation reaction. This condensation reaction is between 3 compounds. The first one is dimethylallyle. The second one and the third one is isopentyl pyrophosphate. So we will have a compound with 15 carbon atom. Why? Because each one of those 3 compounds is 5 carbon atom. Okay, so now we have a 15 carbon compound atom. We call it phenyl pyrophosphate. This phenyl pyrophosphate will react with another phenyl pyrophosphate to form a compound called squalene. This squalene contains 30 carbon atom. Okay, so and by reacting with squalene synthase. After that, the squalene will go through some reactions. The first one is by an enzyme called squalene monooxygenase. Okay, after the squalene monooxygenase, it will react with 2O3 oxidosqualene. See here, we have a monooxygenase, means that we have a 1 oxygen atom. After that, the squalene epoxide means we have an epoxide functional group. After that, the squalene epoxide will react with an enzyme called oxidosqualene lansotryl cyclase. Lansotryl, this is the lansotryl, it's the compound that will be formed. The cyclase, it means that the squalene will be in cycles. The lansotryl after that will go through many steps, lastly to form the cholesterol. Okay, so it's a very huge pathway. Just focus on the name of the compounds and each compound, how many carbon atoms does it have. The last thing that I'm going to talk about in chapter 21 is some calculations that you are required to know, but you may not be asked about them, but I will just explain them. Those calculations, they might ask you how much or how many the ATP that will be produced from the catabolism of an even number fatty acid or an odd number fatty acid or a monounsaturated fatty acid. So let's begin by a general rules that we can apply for the 3 cases. The first general rule, you remember the activation step before entering the beta oxidation cycle. This step needs 2 ATP. There is sources for ATP. We have 2 sources. Remember, from the beta oxidation cycle, in each cycle we will have one NAD and we will have one FAD. Each NADH will give us 2.5 ATP and each FADH2 will give us 1.5 ATP. Also, in each cycle, in the beta oxidation, we will have one acetyl-CoA. This acetyl-CoA will go to the citric acid cycle. Each one acetyl-CoA will form 10 ATP. Okay, so let's see the cases. If they gave you in the exam an even number of fatty acids like an 18 carbon, what to do and how to calculate the ATP? First thing, calculate the number of acetyl-CoA. It's very easy. Number of acetyl-CoA in an even number of fatty acids equal half number of carbon. So the acetyl-CoA in the 18 carbon will be 9. Why? Because it's just the half number. The number of cycles that this fatty acid make in the beta oxidation is very important, because in each cycle we will have a 1 NAD and a 1 FAD. But the number of cycles is half number of carbon minus 1. Why minus 1? Because in the last cycle we will have 4 carbon atoms. Those 4 carbon atoms will be cleaved. We will have 2 and 2. Those 2 and 2, they are acetyl-CoA, so we don't need another cycle. Okay, so the number of cycles is half number of carbon minus 1. In this case, in the 18 carbon, the number of cycles is 9 minus 1 and it's 8 cycles. And remember, in each cycle you will have a 1 NAD and a 1 FAD. So it's very simple. Just multiply 9 by 10. You will have 90 ATP. In the 8 cycles, you will have 8 NADH and 8 FADH2. Each one multiply it by the amount of ATP that it will produce. In the end, the total you must subscribe by 2. Okay, so you will have this number of ATP. Now, if they give you an odd number of fatty acid, how to deal with it? The same way, you need to calculate the number of acetyl-CoA and you need to calculate the number of cycles. The number of acetyl-CoA and number of cycles, you can calculate it by this equation. Number of carbon divided by 2 minus 1.5. Okay, so let's have an example. But before saying this example, in the odd number, in the last cycle, you will have 5 carbon atoms. Those 5 carbon atoms, 2 of them will be cleaved as acetyl-CoA. The remaining 3 carbon atoms will form a molecule called propanol. This propanol will go in a small bath to the citric acid cycle, okay, and it will give us a 1 FAD and a 1 NAD, which equal to 4 ATP. Okay, so you need to add 4 and you need to minus 2. We will see it in the example, but just remember this equation. This equation, we use it to calculate the number of acetyl-CoA and to calculate the number of cycles. So, for example, in the exam they gave you 17 carbon, okay, and it's an example in the book. Number of cycles and the number of acetyl-CoA, just 17 divided by 2 minus 1.5, it will be 7 cycles. So you have 7 cycles. In each cycle you will have 7 acetyl-CoA. In the 7 cycles you will have 7 acetyl-CoA, you will have 7 NADH and you will have 7 FADH2. Okay? If you calculate the amount of ATP that the 7 FADH and the 7 NADH will produce, it will be 28 ATP. And the 7 acetyl-CoA will give you 70 ATP. And the propanol will give you 4 ATP. So if you sum all of those, you will have this number. You must subscribe 2 of it to those 2 ATP from the activation step. You use 2 ATP in the activation step, so you need to subscribe it from this number, and you will have a 100 total ATP in this example. Okay, so just remember this equation, how to calculate, and it's very easy. It's very easy to do. The last one, it's the monounsaturated. You need, in the case of monounsaturated, in the fatty acid compound, to understand it in an easy way, you have a one double bond. Now during the cycle, when the double bond get inside the beta oxidation cycle, in the cycle of the double bond, there will be no FADH2. But in all the other cycles, in the monounsaturated fatty acid, there will be a FADH2. So it's the same as an even number, okay? But you need only to eliminate the step to eliminate 1.5 ATP, okay? So in the monounsaturated case, you just do the same as you do in the even number. In the end, after calculating everything, just eliminate 1.5 from the total, okay? Why? Because the monounsaturated fatty acid, okay, it contains only one double bond. When this double bond reach the beta oxidation cycle, there will be no fat H2 produced. And you remember, in the beta oxidation cycle, in each cycle we will have one fat, one NAD, one acetyl-CoA. But in the monounsaturated, you will not have a fat H2 in the turn of the double bond, but in the other turn you will have fat H2. Okay, so you just eliminate 1.5. For example, for an 18 carbon monounsaturated fatty acid, we saw that the total was, in the even, the total was 120. But if you want to calculate it for the mono, it will be 118.5. Okay, so this is all about the final exam material. Best wishes for all of you.